The story of Saint Josaphat, a true defender of Christian unity, begins in 1580 in the city of Volodymyr in present-day Ukraine. Born Ioan Kunchevich into an Orthodox merchant family, his life from the beginning was destined to be marked by a deep desire to find and promote divine truth. From childhood, Jehoshaphat showed an unusual love of prayer and a remarkable inclination toward piety. Even in his youth, while other boys indulged in pranks, Ioan devoted his time to reading the scriptures and participating in religious services. His precocious devotion and keen intelligence caught the attention of local religious leaders who saw in him a bright future within the church. Ioan's spiritual life, however, would transcend the walls of his local church, reaching an entire region divided by religious tension. At that time, Christianity in the region was divided between followers of the Orthodox Church and believers of the Catholic Church. The Eastern Schism, which occurred in 1054, still echoed strongly, generating deep divisions. The pain of separation affected both leaders and believers, and theological and political disputes made any attempt at reconciliation a gigantic challenge. In this complex scenario, Jehoshaphat would be a light of hope. As an adult, Ioan entered monastic life, adopting the name Josaphat upon becoming a monk in the order of St. Basil. This decision sealed his commitment to follow a life of selflessness and service to God. In the monasteries, the future saint demonstrated rigorous discipline and unparalleled fervor in all spiritual practices. He embraced fasting, prayer, and penance with an intensity that inspired and at the same time challenged his confreres. The Order of Saint Basil was known for its dedication to both hermetism and evangelization. Jehoshaphat stood out in both aspects, but his true gift was in his ability to preach. With a clear and powerful voice, he knew how to captivate crowds, speaking with authority and compassion about the need for unity among Christians. His preaching was not limited to beautiful words. It was a living testimony to his ardent desire for the unification of the Eastern and Western churches. In 1617, Jehoshaphat was appointed Archbishop of Polotsk, a position that came with almost insurmountable challenges. Many of its faithful resisted the idea of joining the Catholic Church, preferring to maintain their Orthodox traditions. The new archbishop knew he would have to battle centuries of distrust and resentment. Yet he faced it all with a patience that only a saint could demonstrate, guided by his conviction that the truth of Christ was one. Under his leadership, the Polotsk diocese began to flourish. Jehoshaphat worked tirelessly to restore churches, improve the training of priests, and encourage the practice of faith among the people. His practical actions were accompanied by a spirit of reconciliation. He always sought to listen and dialogue with those who opposed union with Rome, patiently explaining the spiritual and theological benefits of this unity. Jehoshaphat's work did not go unnoticed. While many were inspired by his holiness and wisdom, others, especially anti-Union Orthodox leaders, saw him as a dangerous threat. The archbishop's incessant preaching and firm actions provoked increasing hostilities, which escalated into open conflict on several occasions. He was accused of betraying the traditions of his ancestors, but his response was always the same: the sincere search for truth in Christ. Jehoshaphat endured the slander with serenity and responded with actions of peace. He welcomed the poor, protected the oppressed, and treated even those who confronted him with kindness. In his house, charity was the rule, and his table was always open to those in need. The archbishop knew that it was not enough to just preach peace. He had to embody it in his own life. Among the miracles attributed to Saint Josaphat, his ability to convert even the most obstinate opponents stands out. It is said that many who fiercely opposed the union ended up surrendering to his profound kindness and impeccable logic. An example of this was the conversion of an influential Orthodox leader who, after listening to a series of sermons by Jehoshaphat, confessed that he had found in the archbishop an example of true holiness and faith. His reputation for holiness and the effectiveness of his work attracted the attention of Rome and the Pope. The Holy Father saw in Josaphat a model bishop and pastor, someone who embodied the teachings of Christ with a burning zeal. Admiration for his work grew to the point of strengthening ties between the Catholic Church and the Eastern territories, offering renewed hope for Christian reconciliation. Unfortunately, Jehoshaphat's dedication to Christian unity would cost him his own life. In 1623, an uprising broke out in Vitebsk, where the local population, instigated by opposing religious leaders, decided to violently confront the archbishop. On November 12th, an angry mob invaded his episcopal residence. Jehoshaphat knew that his life was in danger, but he refused to flee, preferring to surrender to God's will. The scene of his martyrdom was marked by a serenity that testified to his unshakable faith. Jehoshaphat was brutally attacked, but even in his last moments he cried out for forgiveness from his attackers, echoing the words of Christ on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." His body was thrown into a river, but later rescued by those who loved and venerated him. Jehoshaphat's death, far from weakening the Union movement, became a seed of renewal. The martyr's blood generated even greater fervor among his followers, who saw in him a true saint, a defender of the faith to the last breath. Pope Urban VIII, upon hearing of the archbishop's sacrifice, referred to him as the great fighter for the unity of the Church. Jehoshaphat's fame spread quickly throughout Europe. His martyrdom was seen as an irrefutable testimony of unconditional love for Christ and the mission to unify Christians. Catholic churches and communities began to invoke his name, asking for his intercession and inspiration. The impact of his death reinforced the need for dialogue and compassion between different Christian traditions. In 1643, just 20 years after his death, the canonization process began. The Church recognized that Jehoshaphat had heroically lived the Christian virtues, especially charity, patience, and defense of the truth. The path to his canonization was fueled by the many reports of miracles attributed to his intercession, including inexplicable healings and reconciliations between families divided by religion. In 1867, Pope Pius IX officially canonized Saint Josaphat, making him the first saint of the Eastern Rite Catholic Church to be recognized after the Eastern Schism. This canonization was a milestone not only for the Church, but also for all Christians who yearned for unity. Saint Josaphat became a symbol of hope for those who, even in times of great adversity, seek reconciliation. The life and martyrdom of Saint Josaphat continues to inspire Christians around the world. He is remembered not only as a theoretical advocate of unity, but as someone who lived and died for what he believed to be God's will. Priests, bishops, and even lay people see in his story an example of perseverance and unconditional love for the Church. Devotion to Saint Josaphat grew mainly in Eastern Catholic communities, which recognize him as one of their most illustrious representatives. At every Mass or celebration in his honor, the message of reconciliation and unconditional love resonates as a reminder that true faith demands sacrifice and understanding. He is seen as a patron of reconciliation and peace between peoples and religions. In addition to religious ceremonies, the iconography of Saint Josaphat carries deep symbolism. In many representations, he is portrayed in the monastic habit, holding a cross and a palm branch, symbols of his martyrdom and his unbreakable faith. These images are used to inspire believers to imitate their example of absolute dedication to the cause of Christ and the Church. Saint Josaphat's legacy is not only historical, but also deeply spiritual. He represents the truth that the path to holiness is not always easy, but it is filled with divine grace. His life invites Christians to reflect on their own willingness to defend the faith, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Today, the faithful who know the story of Saint Josaphat find him a powerful intercessor, especially in times of religious conflicts and family disagreements. His intercession is often invoked by those seeking inner peace and wisdom to deal with divisions in their own communities. In the Catholic liturgy, his feast is celebrated on November 12th, the date of his martyrdom. At each celebration, readings and homilies highlight his commitment to truth and unity. Priests around the world remember his figure as an example of pastoral leadership, someone who cared for his flock with love and firmness, always seeking the spiritual good of all. For many, the story of Saint Josaphat is a powerful reminder that sainthood is not reserved just for those who live without challenges, but rather for those who face the storms with faith. He teaches that even in the midst of persecution, it is possible to remain faithful and be a witness to God's love. The historical records of his life and writings show a man of great theological knowledge and a simple but unbreakable faith. Jehoshaphat knew that only through union with God could true peace be achieved. This conviction guided his actions from the calmest to the most difficult moments. The challenges faced by Jehoshaphat may seem distant in time, but his message is timeless. In today's world, where divisions still exist between peoples and nations, his life serves as a clear example that the struggle for peace and reconciliation is a universal calling. Jehoshaphat reminds modern Christians that the pursuit of unity requires courage and sacrifice. He was not content to follow the faith passively. He dedicated his life to a cause that he knew was fundamental for the greater good of the Church and the faithful. His example is proof that true faith is active and committed, even when it requires facing opposition and danger. One of the most moving aspects of his story is his testimony of humility and service. Despite holding the position of Archbishop, Jehoshaphat never stopped practicing charity and humility, serving the poor and visiting the sick. He believed that a true shepherd is one who knows the needs of his flock and is willing to care for them at any cost. Among the accounts of his life are stories of how he helped maintain peace in his community. Jehoshaphat intervened in family conflicts and sought to reconcile those who were divided by disputes. He understood that peace in the Church began with peace between people, and his practical actions reflected this belief. Jehoshaphat's courage was fueled by his deep faith. He spent long hours in prayer, often fasting, seeking divine guidance for his steps. At a time when fear of political and religious reprisals could silence many, he did not back down in the face of threats, maintaining his conviction that Christian unity was Christ's desire. The impact of his death was felt not only in Polotsk, but in regions far beyond. The martyrdom of Saint Josaphat inspired a renewed movement of unity and understanding among Christian communities. News of his heroic death spread quickly, and his memory was honored with reports of his virtues in churches in different countries. Saint Josaphat is also known for his example of forgiveness. Even when he faced enemies who wanted his ruin, he responded with prayers and words of peace. This stance captivated everyone who knew him, making him a figure difficult to ignore even by his staunchest opponents. The process of Jehoshaphat's canonization was meticulous, with the Vatican carefully reviewing accounts of his life and the miracles that followed his death. One of the miracles that impressed the most was the healing of a child who, according to witnesses, was on the verge of death. The desperate family asked for Jehoshaphat's intercession, and the child was healed in an inexplicable way. After his canonization, devotion to Saint Josaphat grew even more. He began to be invoked especially in situations of discord and separation within the Church and in Christian communities that sought reconciliation. His figure became a symbol that unity can be achieved through faith and Christian love. Churches and chapels dedicated to Saint Josaphat began to be built, especially in the regions of Eastern Europe, where he is especially venerated. These churches became centers of prayer and reflection on the importance of unity and peace. People who visit these places often leave inspired by their example of unwavering dedication to their faith. Saint Josaphat continues to be a living example of how faith can overcome even the most hostile challenges. His story is proof that God chooses those who are willing to give themselves fully to carry out great works, even when the path is arduous and dangerous. In his martyrdom, Jehoshaphat sealed his testimony with his own blood, an action that echoed Christ's words about ultimate dedication for the love of God and neighbor. He reminds us that the path to holiness may be a path of thorns, but it leads to eternal reward. His life inspires not only priests and religious, but all believers who face challenges in living their faith. The example of Saint Josaphat teaches that everyone has a role in building unity and peace, starting with their own families and communities. The miracles attributed to Saint Josaphat after his death are a testimony to the grace he continues to shower on those who ask for his intercession. Stories of healings and family reconciliations are still told in Catholic communities, proving that his work did not end with his death, but continues to live in the hearts of the faithful. His canonization also brought special meaning to Eastern Rite Catholics. They were able to see in the figure of Jehoshaphat a saint who understood their traditions and who strived to preserve the richness of their rites within the unity of the universal church. It became a point of union between East and West. Even centuries after his death, the memory of Saint Josaphat remains a reminder that faith must be defended firmly, but also with love and understanding. He did not seek violence or imposition, but rather persuasion and charity, elements that transformed his life into an example of modern holiness. Devotion to Saint Josaphat is also a testimony that the search for unity is a continuous work. He planted the seeds of reconciliation that other generations were able to water and grow. His legacy lives on in those who continue to work for peace and unity, inspired by his example. His message is clear. True Christian unity cannot be forced, but must be the fruit of patient and loving effort. Jehoshaphat teaches us that unity is a response to the call of Christ, who prayed that all would be one, as he and the Father are one. Saint Josaphat is therefore an example for religious leaders and lay people, showing that the defense of the faith must always be done with compassion and respect. He proved that it is possible to maintain the integrity of the faith without resorting to hostility, even when faced with great challenges. His example resonates with Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Jehoshaphat was a peacemaker in his time, and his life continues to inspire those who work for peace in our time. The memory of Saint Josaphat spreads through the centuries as a continuous invitation to reflect on the role of faith in uniting, not dividing. He taught that true evangelization is only possible when there is a genuine love for others and a willingness to dialogue. Even though he faced resistance, Jehoshaphat never gave in to despair or violence, but responded with more prayer and acts of kindness. The peace he sought so much was not a simple absence of conflict, but a deep peace, rooted in the truth and justice of God. Jehoshaphat knew that only this lasting peace could transform hearts and create a lasting path of unity among Christian communities. He knew that reconciliation was a slow process, but he believed that every gesture of love, no matter how small, had an eternal impact. His dedication to reforming the local church was also notable. He restored discipline among clergy and ensured that the training of priests was solid and focused on correct doctrine and prayer life. Jehoshaphat understood that the church would only be strong if its leaders were true examples of virtue and piety. He commanded respect, not because of his position, but because of his integrity and humility. Many contemporaries who were eyewitnesses of his life reported his intense devotion to the Eucharist. For Josaphat, Mass was the central point of his spirituality. He believed that there at the altar, he found the source of all strength and the essence of Christian unity. Christ's sacrifice was the supreme example he desired to emulate in his own daily actions. Saint Josaphat's spirituality was based on a combination of deep theological knowledge and simplicity of heart. He knew how to clearly explain the complex issues of faith, but he always tried to translate these truths in a way that the people could understand them. Thus, he won both the respect of scholars and the love of simple people. His martyrdom, tragic as it was a testament to the kind of love that transcends human understanding. The willingness to give his life for faith and for the good of the Church was, for him, an honor, an act of extreme fidelity to Christ. This example of dedication inspired not only Catholics, but also leaders of other traditions who saw his courage as a sign of true holiness. It is important to highlight that Saint Josaphat's path was not free from criticism and misunderstandings. Often, their intentions were distorted by those who feared change or lost power as churches united. Even so, Jehoshaphat persevered, convinced that his mission came from God and not from human opinions. The meaning of his name, Jehoshaphat, which can be translated as God judges, is symbolic of his life. He firmly believed that, in the end, all human works would be judged by God, and that the seeds he planted, even if they did not germinate in their time, would flourish under the divine gaze. This confidence gave him the strength to withstand opposition and move forward. Saint Josaphat teaches us that martyrdom is not just a tragic death, but a supreme expression of love and fidelity to God. His example reminds us that the Christian faith is, ultimately, a call to sacrificial love, where one is willing to give up everything, even one's own life, to honor and defend divine truth. Today, the relics of Saint Josaphat are venerated with great devotion. They were transferred to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome in 1963, a gesture that demonstrated recognition of their importance for the entire Catholic Church. This translation was a sign that Jehoshaphat's legacy goes beyond geographic and historical barriers, uniting believers around the world. The figure of Saint Josaphat is often evoked in times of crisis, especially when division threatens to undermine the unity of the Church. He is invoked as an intercessor in disputes and as protector of those who fight for justice and reconciliation. His life is a powerful example that, with true faith, it is possible to overcome even the greatest challenges and remain faithful to the divine mission. In writings about him, it is common to find reflections on his ability to listen, a gift often neglected in religious leaders. Jehoshaphat knew that unity could only be achieved if there was a willingness to listen to the concerns and fears of others. This simple yet powerful detail made him a truly loved and respected pastor. Saint Josaphat demonstrates that holiness is accessible to everyone, regardless of their origin or position. He was born into a merchant family and could have followed an ordinary life, but chose a life of radical service. This choice made him an example that spiritual greatness does not lie in wealth or power, but in the willingness to follow God's will. Jehoshaphat's perseverance in the face of slander and persecution teaches us about the importance of patience and unshakable faith. He knew that the truth is not altered by the lies of men, and that ultimately, God is the judge of all things. His serene and resilient posture in the midst of so many attacks is an example of fortitude that few can imitate. His memory remains alive, especially in the Catholic communities of the East, who continue to look to him as a spiritual hero. In the masses and festivities in his honor, stories of his dedication and how he fought until the end for the unity of the Church are told. These celebrations are not just acts of memory, but moments of renewal of faith and commitment to the truth. The testimonies of conversions and reconciliations attributed to Saint Josaphat show that, even after his death, he continues to work towards unity and peace. His role as intercessor is viewed with reverence and gratitude, and many who turn to him report experiences of grace and spiritual renewal. In times of polarization, the example of Saint Josaphat becomes even more relevant. He shows us that to overcome divisions, more than words are needed. It takes action, understanding, and above all, a faith that goes beyond differences. He lived to prove that the love of Christ can unite what seems irreconcilable. Jehoshaphat lives in the memory of the Church as a defender of the truth who knew how to be patient and merciful. He understood that true conversion comes from a heart that loves and not from impositions. This wisdom made him an enduring example of how to lead firmly but without losing compassion. His liturgical feast is a special time to reflect on each Christian's personal commitment to the unity of the Church. The faithful are called to pray for reconciliation and to commit to working for it in their own environments. Jehoshaphat is remembered as the one who sacrificed his life so that this unity could become a tangible reality. In his last words and actions, Jehoshaphat showed the depth of his faith. Even when the angry mob attacked him, he remained calm and asked God to forgive his attackers. This final act of love and forgiveness sealed his life as a true Christian martyr, echoing the words of Jesus on the cross. Accounts of his death include the strength of his last prayer and how his serenity surprised even his tormentors. Many who witnessed his execution later reflected on the holiness they had witnessed, a testimony that helped plant the seeds of the unity he so desired. Saint Josaphat's message remains alive because it speaks to a constant need, the desire to overcome divisions with love and faith. He is a reminder that all Christians are called to be peace builders, whether through small gestures or great sacrifices, like his. His legacy also inspires modern religious leaders to be pastors with open hearts and minds focused on the greater good of the Church. Jehoshaphat's courage and dedication are a standard to be followed by all those who wish to serve God and others without measuring efforts. The life of Saint Josaphat, marked by love for truth and total dedication, invites us to reflect on how we can, in our own time, be instruments of peace and reconciliation. He reminds us that in the midst of conflicts and divisions, the Christian response must always be one of charity and hope. We conclude then that Saint Josaphat is more than a martyr from the past. He is a timeless model of living, committed faith. His life and death testify that true unity and peace are possible when Christians commit to following Christ's example with courage, humility, and an unwavering love for the Church. May your intercession continue to guide all of us on our journey towards unity and holiness.